So let's talk about this really weird Karl Anthony Towns story that I think came out of nowhere for a lot of people. Clearly didn't come out of nowhere for Zach Lowe and Windhorst, two guys who I think are around the most respected NBA journalists, and when they say things, it's safe to say that they are correct in that. So with this Towns thing, basically he's unhappy, and I've heard the word trade be brought up by Windhorst himself and other people on the internet. I think it would take quite a lot for Karl Anthony Towns to actually be traded. So I don't know if we can really have that conversation. I guess I can touch on it a little bit. But I think the thing you can talk about is perhaps what that says about this Minnesota team right now. The idea of Wiggins being unhappy, Towns is unhappy, and what this all means. So I have to assume that some of this is going to be rooted in this team's shot hierarchy. Because, I mean, you just look at round one, right? In round one, Wiggins, Jimmy Butler, Derrick Rose, and Jeff Teague, and really Jamal Crawford as well, either shot as many times as Towns, or pretty close to as many times as him, or they shot more than him, okay? Probably not the best idea, given that Towns, I mean, to me, he's the best scorer on this team. I don't know what the actual point totals would say. I mean, him, Wiggins, and Butler were all pretty close, but to me, Towns has the highest offensive potential, right? Can post up on pretty much anybody, although he had a rough time in round one for whatever reason. Awesome three-point shooter, can go off the dribble, very athletic, all that stuff with Towns, right? Also grabs a fair share of offensive rebounds. He grabbed 15 offensive boards in round one against the Rockets. So, dude's offense is crazy. And yet, his shot attempts are not reflecting that for this team. And it is a slippery slope, I get it, because you want to get Wiggins his shots, you want to get Butler his shots, and Jeff Teague, while he's not a big scoring point guard, he's always been a guy who's shot the ball a decent amount of times as well. So I get that you want to manage all that, but at the same time, you could make the argument that turning Jeff Teague into, well, basically just more Tyus Jones, which is a lineup that has been successful for them, by the way, that could be better for you long term because it just gets guys like Towns more shots. So if you could have more plays where Towns could get switched onto a smaller guy, or have him moving off the ball where the majority of NBA bigs cannot keep up with him for potential three-pointers, that may be more productive for you than running a Jeff Teague anything, pretty much, It could also get the ball in Jimmy Butler's hands more often and stuff like that. So I'm going to assume that's part of this. But I do think there could be another element to this, which is Thibodeau as a coach, right? Now, Tibbs, we've seen it. He's a coach who is a hard-nosed guy who can probably be kind of tough to hear every day because it seems like the dude yells a lot, and there's also stories about him having long practices and, of course, the amount of minutes he plays as guys, which I don't know how much they care about that. I mean, I don't know. It's an 82-game season, and maybe playing an extra 5 minutes a game that you don't really need to play can get grating night after night, but Towns is also 22, so I don't know how big of a deal that one is, but you always hear this stuff about how Thibodeau's kind of a drill sergeant, right? And then you combine that with the fact that he's all about defense, and this team has not been able to figure it out on defense, and a lot of the reason for that is because of Towns, because having a bad defensive center makes it almost impossible for you to be good on that side of the floor, right? Especially with how often teams run pick and rolls and stuff nowadays. So there's a possibility that Towns is not getting the shot attempts he deserves, not getting as much offense run through him as he deserves. He's having to sit through these super long practices, and then he's got to hear it day in and day out from Tibbs that he's not doing well enough on defense. I can understand why you might be like, all right, this isn't exactly the most fun place to play right now. Now, can you also make the argument that he needs to toughen up a bit? Yeah, I mean, if you're not good on defense and you're 22 years old, you should be hearing that day in and day out. And I do know that there's also been some rumors of Jimmy Butler being frustrated with the young guys sometimes. I believe that was like earlier in the season, and he slowly made the team his, basically, whether that's being vocal in the locker room or that and the combination of dominating the ball and taking over the offense down the last, 50 games or so, up until he got injured, I guess. Yeah, I can see why you'd maybe have some frustrations if you're Towns. But, some of these things he probably does just have to get over himself with, if these are the things. For all I know, it's something totally different, and, that stuff, if this ends up becoming like a real thing, then I guess that stuff will come out in time. But until then, all I can really do is speculate, The other thing we can talk about is if this really got to a point of, like, someone's got to go, who ends up going here? If it's got to be between Tibbs and Towns, then Tibbs is out, This is not a Greg Popovich situation. This is not, I guess, maybe even a Brad Stevens situation. Like, maybe Stevens has reached that point where he could actually win over the star player. Even then, maybe not. But Tibbs definitely hasn't, So if it gets to that point, then Tom Thibodeau is going to get fired as the T-Wolves coach, and then who knows what's going to happen after that. If this becomes a matter of, like, Jimmy Butler is totally fed up with Towns and he thinks the Towns just doesn't focus enough and he's whining about not getting enough touches and he's not good enough on defense and all those things, then Jimmy Butler's out too, okay? Because number one, he's got that contract option coming up after the 2019 season. And if all this is true, then he would probably just bounce, right? So maybe you could make a trade for him. That would be tricky because, he'd have to be willing to re-sign and that can of worms. But, he's going to be 29 next season. Towns is going to be 23. It's a pretty easy pick. If it would be somehow possible to, like, remove Andrew Wiggins from the situation, which would then, I guess, maybe removing one of the young guys who sucks on defense would make Butler happy, and then you could keep him and Towns. Like, I guess that would be cool, but Wiggins' contract is, like, not impossible to move. I think a team like, Dallas or Phoenix or Sacramento, they'd probably be all for it, but it would be tricky to move nonetheless. But that just may be the route that this ends up going. Like, if this really just melts down to someone's got to go, Towns is going to win this, if Minnesota knows what they're doing. If they just want to live in the moment and be a 45-win team for a couple more seasons with Jimmy Butler and Thibodeau, then they'll trade Towns and then they'll regret it for the next 10 years once Jimmy Butler's too old to lead them to the 7th seed in the West anymore. So, yeah, it's pretty clear which side of this I fall on. You got to keep the 22-year-old who has all the potential to average 35 points a game. So you do that, and you hope he figures it out on defense. As far as actual basketball moves that could potentially be made, I mentioned earlier, like Tyus Jones over Jeff Teague. Something like that. If you could find a better version of Tyus Jones out there, good luck doing it. I think trading Jeff Teague would be challenging because he's got the $19 million player option that I assume he's going to accept. So you're basically taking on $40 million in 2 years of Jeff Teague if you traded for him if you were a different team. So that would be tricky, but that could end up working, get Towns and really everybody else some more shot attempts. So it's an idea if you wanted to cater to Towns a little bit. But besides that, who knows, man? We'll just have to see how this all plays out. I don't have any insider information, but I will reiterate it once again. If Minnesota knows what they're doing, Karl Anthony Towns is going to come out of this as the winner. And if that means that Tibbs and Jimmy have to go, then so be it.